think maybe we made it up.
Very good.
I think it's all right.
Okay, I'm gonna call this meeting to order. Alex, if you would conduct the roll.
So, I just wanted to let folks know that in order to provide the maximum flexibility in light of the COVID resurgence, our holding this meeting in a hybrid format. That means some of the council members have joined us via WebEx. You'll see them at the top of the screen. But in accordance with open meetings law, only those that are present in the room are allowed to count towards the quorum and participate in the votes. People on the call can't participate in the conversation. So those that have joined us online and members of the public, they can listen and view the board meeting. The meeting is being recorded and will be archived for later viewing as people need. Next slide, please. So our public is able to join us on publicinput.com/GTC board. The public will be able to observe the meeting and listen live, and then view a live feed of the meeting. Folks are able to submit questions or comments via the chat function, email, text. They can record a voice message or even indicate they'd like to talk to the board at the designated time, and our staff will be able to patch them into to the speakers. And then this slide just lets people know that are on public input how they can participate, and that information is already out there for folks to see. And this is a recap of our agenda.
I'll take the roll call. Genesee County, Ms. Stein.
Present.
Livingston County, Mr. Lefevre.
Present.
Monroe County Legislator, Dr. Carbone. Ontario County, Mr. Marin. Orleans County, Ms. Johnson. We have John Papanetti online. Seneca County, Mr. Hasten. Wayne County, Mr. Miller.
Here.
Wyoming County, Ms. Ryan. Yates County, Mr. Paddock.
Some color is here.
Monroe County Executive, Mr. Bella.
I guess I'm here.
Jim Bond. Brendan Tung, Monroe County Planning Board, Mr. Santos.
I'm here.
And Rochelle. Monroe County Supervisors Association, Mr. Giunta. This is online. Monroe County at large, Mr. Hogan.
Here.
Monroe County at large, Mr. McCann.
Scott Levis is representing.
City of Rochester Mayor Warren. Rochester City Council, Ms. Scott. We have Kelly Hasselwander as an alternate online. Rochester City Planning Commission, Mr. Watson. City of Rochester at large, James McIntosh is online. Empire State Development Corporation, Mr. Eunice. New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, Mr. Sagos.
And Walsh representing.
Welcome, Tim. New York State DOT, Ms. Dominguez.
Joel Kleinberg representing.
New York State Brewery Authority, Mr. Driscoll.
Sean Carrington representing.
Thanks, Sean. Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council.
Present.
Thanks, Jen. Rochester Genesee Regional Transportation Authority, Mr. Jeffries.
Bill Carpenter representing.
Thank you, Bill. Federal Aviation Administration, Ms. Martinez. Federal Highway Administration, Mr. Marquis. Maria's
Maria Chen
online.
representing.
Thank you. Federal Transit Administration, Mr. Goodman.
Zoma and representing.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Alex. Move into the public forum. We'll ask if there's any members of the public that would like to address the board at this time.
Lori's indicating we do not have anybody online expressing an interest to offer a comment.
Thank you. Move into the minutes. I'll ask for a motion in a second to consider the minutes.
So moved.
I'll second. We have a motion in a second. I'll ask if there's any corrections at this time to the minutes as they were presented. Hearing none, I'll take a vote. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, they're carried. Jim, if you would please, communications and announcements.
Okay, I should have said this at the beginning of the meeting. It was communicated in the cover memo, but the RGRTA policy is you do not need to mask up in here. As if you're vaccinated, Bill, or regardless, although everybody has the option to do so.
As of this time.
As of the rules haven't changed
So
yet.
noted at 8:47.
Then moving into our more traditional announcements. Due to the resignation of Eric Gertler, Kevin Eunice is the member representing the Empire State Development Corporation until a replacement is named. Gary Maha of the Genesee County Legislature has been designated as an alternate to Rochelle Stein. Jerry Davis of the Wyoming County Board of Supervisors has been designated as an alternate to Rebecca Ryan. Kevin Kelly of the City of Rochester has been designated as an alternate to, nope. I'm sorry, who's the city planning commission?
Kevin Kelly.
No, Mr. Watson.
Oh, Kevin.
And then Chris Reed, New York State Department of Transportation Region 4, has been designated as an alternate to Marie Therese Dominguez, and Joel Kleinberg of NISAT Region 4 has been designated as an alternate to Christopher Reed. And that's the announcements. Thank you.
There's more acting over there than Hollywood.
Oh.
Throwing shots.
So we'll move into the reports and actions on old business, and of course, the planning committee from August 12th was provided to us. I'd ask Scott and others just to please provide us a report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone. The planning committee met on August 12th and recommends that the GTC board accept reports as evidence of completion of one unified planning work program task. That would be the Monroe County Land Use Monitoring Report. Also, to amend the fiscal year 2020-2024, I should say federal fiscal year 2020-2024 transportation improvement program as requested by the City of Rochester, Genesee and Monroe counties, and New York State Department of Transportation. Also amended the GTC TIP procedures manual, amended the national performance measures to report for the Genesee Finger Lakes region, adopting the Genesee Finger Lakes Region Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan update, and authorize the establishment of an active transportation advisory group. Additionally, the planning committee took the following actions. We approved scopes of work for 4 UPWP tasks. Route 96 over Route 14 strategic divestment analysis, the West Webster Hamlet revitalization plan, the RGRTA regional city and village local service study, and the Monroe County countywide active transportation plan. We approved 16 administrative modifications to the federal fiscal year 2020-2024 transportation improvement program as requested by the town of Batavia, City of Rochester, Livingston, Ontario, and Wayne counties, and the New York State Department of Transportation. And for a list of those projects, feel free to see me or anyone from GTC staff after the meeting. Concludes my report.
Thank you, Scott. There's no questions on Scott's report. We'll move into the GTT staff report, please, Jim.
I have nothing that's not already elsewhere on the agenda, so we can just move on.
Thank you. Then we'll move into the,
Jim?
Yes?
This is Jody. I just want to make a quick announcement. For folks that are listening in on the WebEx, it is hard to hear who's talking. So if you make an action or a motion, could you just please say your name? That will be very helpful for those that are listening online. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. Okay.
very good. So we'll move into the old business. Jim, we have a federal legislative and funding update.
Yes, and as you've all probably seen, if you're paying attention to the news, there's been significant activity in Congress related to an infrastructure package. On August 10th, the U.S. Senate passed H.R. 3648, which is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, or IIJA. The bipartisan infrastructure framework agreement between the president and a bipartisan group of senators formed the foundation of the act. The final vote was overwhelmingly bipartisan with 69 yeses and 69 ayes and 30 nays. With Senate passage, the bill was sent to the U.S. House of Representatives, and although the House was scheduled to be on recess until September 20th, Leader Steny Hoyer called the House into session Monday evening to take up the bill. The House voted along party lines to adopt a rule to work on a $3.5 trillion budget framework that encompasses additional priorities of the Biden administration beyond the IIJA. It establishes a top-line figure for the federal budget, and Speaker Pelosi has directed the committees of jurisdiction to develop the 13 budget bills to cover government operations and provide them to the Budget Committee Chairman John Yarmouth by September 15th, so they can be debated and signed into law by the October 1st start of the new federal fiscal year. The rule also requires that the House will vote on the IIJA by September 27th. So that framework commits to the House taking a vote on what the Senate adopted. Of interest, I think, to many in this room, the IIJA does not include any of the member designated projects that the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee passed in their bill. These were, many of your communities had interactions with your congressional delegation, identifying projects, what they used to call earmarks, and they went through a much more transparent process this time. But they're not currently in the bill. It's not yet clear what the House will try to do to restore those projects. There's some conversation of doing it as part of the $3.5 trillion budget framework. Some highlights of the bill of interest would be that it succeeds the current FAST Act and authorizes transportation programs for 5 more years. It includes $318.6 billion for highways and from the Highway Trust Fund, which is a 41% increase over the FAST Act. It includes $70 billion for transit formula programs from the Highway Trust Fund, which is an increase of 43% over the FAST Act. More specifically, the bill with regard to formula programs includes $5.5 billion per year for a dedicated bridge. Infrastructure grants, $5 billion overall for electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and $4.75 billion for transit state of good repair grants. All of these that I mentioned will come down via formula to states and then sub areas of those states. So RGRTA as a designated recipient will get certain state of good repair grants by formula. Then the regions will get some of these other formula programs. There's some discretionary programs. There is discretionary grants from the Highway Trust Fund for a bridge investment program, in addition to the other bridge program. It would start out at $600 million in the first year of the bill and increase to $700 million in the last year. The Transportation Alternatives Program, which is typically used for non-motorized transportation, is being increased from $850 million in the last year of the FAST Act, which expires in a few weeks, to 1.34 in the first year of IIJA, increasing to just shy of 1.5 billion in the final year. But it will also expand the eligibility to include safe routes to school and vulnerable road user safety projects in the TAP. There's also some competitive grant programs which entities will apply for, and selections will be made at USDOT headquarters. There's a little over $1.8 billion per year for that same bridge investment program I just mentioned. So again, some is by formula, some is by competitive. $640 million per year for infra grants for freight projects. $100 million per year for a Reconnecting Communities pilot program to help communities that were severed by transportation facilities decades ago. Interloop in Rochester is an example, IE1 in Syracuse is an example. So they're working to re-envision some of these corridors as they come to the end of their useful life. There's $3 billion for railroad crossing elimination program, really intended to improve safety by reducing conflicts between trains and vehicles. And $5.25 billion for a new no emissions bus program that would provide funding for non-diesel buses that are less emissions. There are some new programs in the bill too. $1 billion a year for a national infrastructure project assistance competitive grant program. These would be larger infrastructure projects. We'll have to see what the details come out. $1.5 billion per year for local and regional project assistance, a competitive grant program that, the sense I'm getting, this would be not state DOTs, it would be counties, municipalities, regional agencies that could apply for these funds. $5 billion for a safe streets and roads for all competitive grant program. The idea of, it's not just motor vehicles that are using the roads, and how do we make it safer for everybody? And then $1 billion for a new culverts competitive grant program. Culverts have always been eligible as part of a road project, but we have some very large culverts that on their own don't compete well for the highway funds and don't qualify for the bridge funds. So this program is dedicated to culverts. I'll have to get the details. They need to be on federal way roads. They need to be a certain size. For example, Ontario County has been challenged with, they have culverts that are sometimes 50, 60 feet below the road. Well, it's one thing if you're got a level terrain and you've got a culvert just below the surface, county highway crews can generally deal with that. But when it's 50, 60 feet down and you got to deal with the excavation, it's a much more complicated project. So that's where the special contractors come in. And then there's two new programs also that the funding amount isn't clear as far as the dollar amount, but there is a new carbon reduction program. 65% of the state's funds that come to a state for this program have to be suballocated to urbanized areas by population formula. So the Rochester large urban area would get a dedicated amount. And it establishes a new promoting resilient operations for transformative, efficient, and cost-saving transportation, or the PROTECT program. This is really trying to build resiliency into our transportation projects. And we've seen greater incidents of extreme weather and different things going on. But several years ago, GTC took on a critical transportation infrastructure vulnerability study with a follow-on that looked just at some locally owned bridges. So we feel that this could really help position our region to take advantage of this program, because we followed a framework established by FEMA to evaluate these vulnerabilities. So I hope we're in good shape for that. And as you can see, this is really a substantial increase in support for transportation infrastructure across the country. But the IIJA also provides funding for other types of infrastructure that we don't deal with at this table, like broadband and ports, and waterways, airports. So pretty significant investment. And with that, I'll do my best to answer any questions you might have.
Good. Hearing no questions, we'll move on to the TIP staff modifications, which we've all received. And would please, Alex.
Sure, there were 5 projects that were modified by staff with the concurrence of the TIP Development Committee. As shown on the screen, pretty much all reducing funding or creating small errors. So just these are were approved by the TDC.
Move on to the TIP staff modification.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that?
That was me, sorry.
Oh. All right, I thought I heard my name. So that's the start.
We're good with that, so next we'll move on, Jim, to the FTA slash HWA joint certification.
Yeah, so you may recall from recent meetings that our transportation planning process was subject to a joint certification review by the Federal Highway and Federal Transit Administrations, with the most visible aspect of that review being a virtual site visit back in March. Maria Chow and Uzola Anukwe led the effort, and they'll be taking over the video feed for their presentation. And please bear with us. We think it'll work if Maria, I think you have the presentation?
Yes, I have the presentation. I'm about to load it up.
All right. Oh, something's loading. All right, we have it. Great.
All right, terrific. Well, good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to join you. I'm Maria Chow, the Senior Community Planner. I'm here with my FTA counterpart. I'll let him introduce himself.
My name is Uzoma Nukwe. I'm community planner at FTA Region 2.
Yeah, we're very glad to join you this morning, and it has been quite a almost 2 years now. My goodness, quite an interesting 2 years with COVID-19. We wanted to first of all, we want to thank everyone for their participation in the certification review. We know that it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort to prepare, and also, as far as meeting up with with policy board members and planning committee members, I want to thank David Lefebvre and also Scott Leatherstitch for their time to talk with us. And we especially want to thank Jim Stack and his staff for all the work they've done in preparing for this review and going through this with us. So we're going to go through just a debrief with everyone on the line and also with everyone in the room. We want to just share with you all the different findings and also take in any questions that you may have. We're not going to go through the entire certification review and all their findings. We're going to highlight some certain areas, and so with that, I'm just going to kind of give you a quick recap of the certification review process. We'll talk a little bit about the types of findings, and then the overview of the findings, the recommendations, notable areas, and then we'll take any of the questions that you may have. And actually, if you have any questions, while you're hearing things, please feel free to put them in the chat box, or if you like, you can ask at that moment. So I'm going to start. So as far as the certification review is concerned, the reason why we conduct certification reviews is because in the law, it states that the DOT Secretary of Transportation, must certify TMA areas, populations over 200,000 every 4 years. So that's one of the reasons why that is actually the main reason why we conduct certification reviews. The types of findings that we have are corrective actions, recommendations, and commendations. And to just go over what each of them are, corrective actions are anything that where an MPO is not meeting the federal statutes. If it's in the CFR, if it's in the USC, then and it's not being met to a certain level, then it would be a corrective action. Recommendations also fall under are areas where the MPO is meeting the requirements, but maybe not maybe not strong enough. Maybe it's not being implemented well in a particular area, or it could use some improvement. So that's one of the reasons why we'd have a recommendation. The other reason why we have a recommendation is best practice that's out there, and we believe that having just a recommendation to discuss that with the MPO will provide them with some information so that they can make improvements if they'd like in to their planning process. And then, the third reason is because there are administrative fees, and from time to time, we will put recommendations in that are based on these administrative priorities. And finally, there's commendations, and this is where we give commendations when we see things that are, that raise the level that we would like to share nationally. So, anything that raises to that level, we take commendations. That said, though, we also know that there are a lot of great practices that that NPOs do, and we wanted to make sure that also recognized. So we also put in the report areas that are notable, things that we think that the MPO is doing particularly well, things that we believe that are good practices, and they may not rise to the level of a commendation, but we certainly wanted to recognize them and point them out. So with that, our report findings is so GTC meets and exceeds the requirements of the regulations, and is fully certified, and it was effective in July 21st, 2021, and it's effective. So the next certification review will be in 2025. So a quick summary of those findings is that GTC had no corrective actions. There were 13 recommendations. There are 4 commendations, and then we found 9 notable areas. So we're going to go into the highlighted recommendations. We're not going to go through all 13 of them. The first one is that when we were looking through different documents and when we were looking through the definition of the metropolitan planning area, that there were some inconsistencies with between that and what's in the MOU. So we found that in some cases in different maps that we saw that the MPA area was smaller than the 9-county region, and it was defined as the MPA. And then of course the MOU actually states that they're 9 counties. So we wanted to just raise that as an area that you might want to take a look at, especially as you're as we're going into a new census, as we're going into a new census cycle with the new census information. You might want to relook at the your definition of your MPO area and your MPA. Additionally, as far as like the Unified Planning Work Program, in recent years, we found that there was a buildup of carryover funds. And really, when it comes to the carryover funds, the way we see it is that, when there's carryover funds, that means there's money that is still available to be used for transportation planning. And the way that federal funding works is that the obligation authority that is given to a state is for that year, and once it's all used up, that is the obligation authority is completely used. It doesn't carry over. But the federal funds, that haven't been used do carry over. So, what's essentially happening is that the obligation authority, that's not used in that year, you'll have obligation authority for the following year, but it won't necessarily, be truly a carryover. The funding carries over, but it's not the obligation authority. So we find that that's an opportunity for MPOs to use their full funding, and so we wanted to point that out because this is the first time that we've cited this as a finding, and find that there's a large carryover. Again, we would certainly recommend that the policy board take a look at those additional funds and see how they might be used for transportation planning in your area. So with that, I'm going to pass this on to Zoma.
Okay, thank you, Maria. I just want to also just step back a bit, just to say thank you to the GTC staff. I'm talking about leadership, Jim, Alex, and Jody. This was a phenomenal. I'm talking about this was virtual, but the setup leading toward the meetings prior to the SOAR review, the SOAR review, actually everything just went seamlessly, was phenomenal. So I'm very, very, very appreciative to Jim and his staff. Alex Cohen was phenomenal. And also to the board, I said thank you, the chair of the board, I said thank you, and the planning committee chair, and members, I also said thank you to you. The transit activities, we looked at public transit activities in the region. And one thing that stood out to us was the participation in the project advisory committee for the Human Services Transportation Plan update. And we encourage GTC to continue to explore opportunities to encourage participation of key people. I'm talking about key demographics or groups of people that are mostly impacted by the plan. We're talking about seniors and people with disabilities. And this is one of the key recommendations. There are many recommendations that Maria said of public transit, but this was one of the recommendations that public transit FTA that wants to highlight. And can you move on to the next slide, Maria? To the next slide.
I'm on the next slide.
Okay. All right. And also, this is another recommendation that we wanted to highlight. And one of the current administration's priority is equity and also diversity. And we encourage DTC to consider and prioritize equity and diversity in the membership of the policy board, working groups, and planning committee. Can you go to the next slide?
Sure, yeah. So as far as the recommendation on tribal nations consultation, within the 9-county region that makes up GTC, there resides the Tonawanda Seneca Nation. And what we found was that there were, while there were some attempts to reach out to them, that maybe the connections weren't actually, the connection actually didn't take. It wasn't like there were any conversations between the Tonawanda and GTC. So we actually brought in Trish Millington and also the Tonawanda Senecas to meet with GTC during the certification review. So we would just recommend that the Tonawanda Senecas and GTC find ways to communicate that would be effective so that they could be part of the planning process. One of the things that we found was that, while GTC, when they were developing and updating their LRTP, that there was a project that was really close to the Tonawanda Senecas, and they had not been really notified of that project or had, any ability to have those discussions with with MPO. They probably didn't know who to contact. So that said, we're just encouraging that coordination and that collaboration to take place. Okay, so now we're going to go into the areas of commendations, and I will start. Want to just say that one of the things that we've been actually reviewing across the state is the transportation planning process and how that how regionally significant projects are impacted by that. And when looking through all the materials that GTC produced, and also just the that you guys have engaged in, we found that for regionally significant projects, you guys had done a really great job of ensuring that that projects that were large and would involve a lot of different parties to agree on that there was the high level of coordination, cooperation, and so we wanted to highlight that. It was these projects were in your LRTP, they were in your tips, you had done studies on them, so there was a lot of collaboration and coordination ahead of it actually going through the NEPA and the ROD. So we wanted to highlight that as a best practice. Additionally, for tip development, and, you know, we look at tip performance every year. And 4 years ago, the tip performance was, you know, was under 75%, which is the national, you know, kind of like the national standard. And so, you know, what we found is that, you know, over the last 4 years, there have been significant improvements to the tip performance of the unamended tip by year. So, you know, we were glad to see that. One of the reasons why we look at that is because, you know, when the public is looking at the tip, we want it to, you know, we want it to be a reliable document. So the things that you guys are doing in planning are really, and so that, you know, when you say you're going to be working on a project that year, you know, that the tip document actually expresses that. So that's what we're looking for when it comes to the performance of the tip. I'm going to pass this on to Zoma now.
And another area that we felt that we needed to commend GTC for their work is on ITS. And this is congestion management process, the CMP process. And we felt like GTC's adoption of the regional TISMO plan, which has a lot, you know, when we look at public transit, there were a lot of ITS activities in the TISMO plan that were related to public transit. And we noticed that, so we found that most of those key public transit ITS elements have already been implemented by GTC in the region. So this is a testament to the great work that GTC is doing. So we felt like that was a commendation. Maria, you do security.
Thank you. Finally, the last commendation is really on the way that you handled COVID-19 and transitioning from, you know, from an in-person environment to a virtual environment, now to a hybrid environment. It is, you know, as far as just, you know, going from, you know, one situation to the other with, with high variability and changes all the time. You know, we wanted to provide a commendation to GTC staff as well as, you know, the GTC board and planning committee and everyone that's involved, you know, on, you know, continuing the transport process even through, you know, these very unusual times. So that is our final commendation. And I just wanted to highlight one area as far as a notable area. I had 9 notable areas, and so I'd love to be able to go through every single one of them. It's certainly in the report, but the one I wanted to highlight the most is that during our conversations with the policy board and planning committee, as well as the stakeholders and members of the public, what we found was that the MPO staff, you know, were always highlighted as, you know, people that, you know, that they can go to for expertise. And during our review, when we were speaking with the staff, you know, and so just through our observations, we found that, you know, the staff is very, very well connected on the national level with different organizations and also committees. On the state level, you know, they take leadership roles, you know, as chairs of working groups and other things. Just a really excellent, you know, excellent expertise, you know, within the MPO staff. So we wanted to highlight that as a notable. Okay, so with that, I'm going to open this up to any questions that you may have. I'd be happy to take anything that you might, you know, have questions.
I just curious, now that we got the report, there was a couple corrective actions required in there. Who's gonna take ownership of those?
On the recommendations, GTC
Well,
staff,
The corrective actions was the first category, those have to be done.
we have 0 corrective actions.
Oh,
All recommendations.
Yeah.
never mind.
I'm happy to say we have 0 corrective.
That's good.
Last 4 years ago, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
So, Jim, if I may, And while Maria is here, I represent Genesee County where the tribal nation does reside. Currently, when Genesee County communicates, we are communicating with one of 17 different self-appointed chiefs. So when we communicate with one, we communicate with the rest. It is really interesting to hear your comments that they don't know who to communicate with. Because that certainly is not the outreach on our half in the county. And my counterpart here with the state DOT is nodding his head at the same time. So the fact that the question was asked from the nation's viewpoint and not from the viewpoint of this group, I think perhaps needs to be reconsidered, to having both viewpoints being considered in your remarks. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate your, your feedback. I'm glad to hear that, that on the county level that, there is tribal consultation. When we looked at the GTC documentation and we looked at the process that this particular entity, the MPO, I don't know if I saw any consultation that took place where it was represented in any documentation. Considering that there was a project that was right near the Tonawanda Senecas and it wasn't, they didn't have an opportunity to provide comments. That's really what we were looking at. But I'm glad to hear that there is consultation with the tribal nations on the county levels.
Thank you.
I just wanted to comment on that. So as we call it, the site visit was back in March, and we had some ongoing conversations as to the final report was being developed. So in the meantime, our staff did reach out to the Tonawanda Seneca Nation to better understand their needs. Lori Marr and I were actually invited to visit the territory on July 21st, I'm sorry. And we were there for a few hours, we had a discussion, and then Christine Abrams, who was the point person for sort of like the staff to the council, gave us a tour and showed us, some of their transportation needs. So, gosh, we went 3 or 4 hours, we were out there. So we thought that was a really good first step in starting to address these comments and try to build that relationship so that when we do go to them, hopefully we're getting some feedback. In the past, we would send a notice like, hey, this is out there and not hear back. But as the federal team, we noted that, lack of a response on their part does not mean lack of interest. So we're trying to build that relationship. And like I said, we were invited out there, and Lori and I did go out last month. So we think that's a first step in building that relationship.
Yeah, that's great, Jim. I mean, I'm really glad to hear that things have already, started to take place, to build those relationships. And to just kind of like elaborate a little bit more on why it's important for the consultation to take place on the MPO level is because, you guys are the beginning of the transportation process. And any project built has to go through using federal funds, federal aid funds has to go through, this policy board. So any project decisions that are made that could be, that could be looked on from the nation standpoint, that captures their interest would really be helpful. So I think that that's really what, one of the reasons why we, put this as a recommendation.
I just would like to express appreciation on behalf of the staff to our federal partners for taking the time to review our planning process and offering up these recommendations for us to pursue over the next 4 years. But we're not waiting. As demonstrated in today's agenda meeting, or today's agenda, several of the items are already moving forward. We have an item for the coordinated plan that The plan that was in effect when the federal review team was looking at it was from 2016. We have since gone through a complete update process, and that's on the agenda today. With we think it's more responsive to the concerns that the federal team raised. We also have there was in the recommendation, wasn't called out today, but the transit safety performance measures, that's on our agenda today to incorporate the transit safety measures. And then as far as the diversity and advisory groups and the like, a brief talking point on potentially creating an advisory group that would start to bring some of that diversity to the table. So like I said, we're not waiting. We had the advantage of knowing what was coming today. So we kept marching forward and actually knowing since March some of the concerns of the review team.
Yeah, Jim, I'm glad I'm seeing some of the movement. You're pursuing the, recommendation, try to address some of the recommendations. I'm very encouraged by what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any further questions or discussions? Certainly, thank you for your review. It was very educational for me, and I learned a lot. And thank our staff for all the participation.
And we would, we just want to thank you guys again, for all the work that you guys did for this review. As I mentioned, it is a lot of work for a review, and also to bring all the different parties together to conduct a really thorough and good review. So, we want to thank Jim. We want to thank you and your staff again. We also want to thank the policy board and planning committee members that participate, and also just for your time today. And certainly, if you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to either me or Azoma. And our information is in our slide deck, which we can send to GTC.
Thank you, guys. You're more than welcome to stay on for the rest of the meeting. Alex is taking over the presentation again, so then we can move on.
Very good.
Okay, thank you.
To some action items. We do have the UPWP closeout. I'd ask for a motion and a second, please.
Bill Kleinberg, so moved.
Bill Carpenter, second.
So we have a motion and a second. Jim, would you provide an overview, please?
Yes, proposed resolution 2152 was reviewed and recommended for your approval by the planning committee at its August 12th meeting. This project was conducted by Monroe County, and the purpose of the project was to document land use and development trends in Monroe County for use in updating the GTC travel demand model. Tasks include distributing municipal surveys and following up with those that were slow to respond. The report compiled annual and proposed development by municipality, and at what we call the transportation analysis zone level, and this is sub areas within our travel demand model to represent what's going out in the street network and the types of development that will generate traffic. Monroe County staff have added some trend analyses to this report and various graphics to better understand the data. And one example is the pie chart we have up on the screen now. And if you look here, you can see the greatest number of projects fall into the residential and commercial categories, blue and orange on the screen. And within the residential category, though, major projects may include, could be single-family subdivisions, but it also could be multifamily projects on a single site. And these could result in very different densities and transportation impacts. So it helps when we delve into the data a little more. Other aspects get into, other report and data items get into the number of residential units to better understand where these developments are occurring. A large building with 20 apartments concentrated versus 20 single-family homes on 1 acre lots, the traffic impacts are very different. So it helps us understand, and we appreciate their taking this on. And I will note that it is done in full coordination with the Genesee Finger Lakes Regional Planning Council that looks at the remaining 8 counties. And next meeting, I think we're going to have their report. So. With that, I'll try to answer any questions. I got Rochelle backing this up if I can.
Sounds good. Does anybody have any questions or discussion? Hearing none, we'll, take a vote, I guess, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, that's carried. Next, we'll consider some tip amendments. I'll ask if any member or alternate wishes to have any of these separated, and if no one objects, we consider them all under one action. Hearing that, I'd ask for a motion in a second, then we'll consider all these under one action.
Motion.
Jay Gazelle, second.
Thank you, Jim, if you would, an overview, please.
Sure. Resolutions 21-53 through 2180 were reviewed and recommended for your approval by the planning committee on August 12th. The changes that are there are interrelated, and they reflect our end of federal fiscal year efforts to maximize the current year funding and, quote, set the table for next year. And by realigning the project phases within the TIP, the latest cost estimates and anticipated schedules are the TIP performance that the region is evaluated on each year should rate well. This was Maria's comment about how our TIP performance has come up from 4 years ago. The changes also reflect recent commitments of statewide funding to projects, which then allows us to stretch the use of our regional funding. And, sort of in this vein, I want to draw attention to a successful situation of what we call keeping the pipeline of projects ready to go. And despite not having construction until 2023, Genesee County maintained an aggressive schedule to design the South Lime Street Bridge replacement project in the city of Batavia. And because they got the designs done, they're able to take advantage of available funding, and a new bridge will be constructed a full year earlier than originally planned. So they're gonna get it next year instead of the following year. And this is the type of focus that your representatives on the TIP Development Committee have each quarter as they try to take full advantage of the federal funds available to the region and constantly moving the Jenga pieces so the tower doesn't fall. You'll note that we also have proposed resolution 21-81. This actually emerged after the August 12th Planning Committee, and it's dealing with an unanticipated project eligibility issue that came up with CMAQ funds. So accordingly, the Planning Committee has not had an opportunity to consider this change. That's the only reason they don't have a recommendation. They haven't even had a chance to discuss it. But taking this action now to defer the project beyond October 1, allows us to figure out the best path forward in conjunction with RGRGA and making sure that these funds flow to the region in the best way possible.
Very good. Is there any questions or discussion on these action items we're considering? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None, that's carried. Good, well, we have consider amending the TIP procedures manual. I'd look for a motion in a second to discuss that.
Scott, was it move?
Jay Gazelle, second.
Thank you. We have a motion in a second. Jim, if you give us an overview, please.
Sure. Proposed resolution 2175 was reviewed and recommended for your approval by the Planning Committee at its August 12th meeting. The TIP procedures manual guides the development of new TIPs and the ongoing management of existing TIPs, including updates. The manual was last updated in 2018 before the current TIP development cycle began. Since then, the TIP Development Committee has encountered various situations and have offered up process improvements. The proposed changes incorporate updates to the relevant federal authorizations and regulations, and also reflects the latest, reflects changes related to the long-range transportation plan that was just adopted in June. Under the TIP development section, we use a table to simplify understanding of what actions are required for which situations, whether that be a staff level, planning committee level, or this board level. We've taken efforts to distinguish between regional funds, which we are known as planning targets that are assigned to the region each update cycle. And then also statewide funds that we refer to main office, various statewide programs where the project selections are made in Albany and come to the region, so we distinguish. And the big reason for that is the main office funds are dedicated to specific projects, and GTC really does not have the discretion on how they're used, but they are usually to our benefit. But in order to be able to react in a more timely manner, we have some tweaks in there for lower level cost changes, so they can be addressed by the planning committee. And then you'll see that the various charts, we have the staff modifications, the administrative modifications that the planning committee does. They both have fail-safes built into them. So if there is not unanimous support at the TIP development committee for a staff modification, it will automatically elevate to the planning committee. If there is not unanimous support at the planning committee for an administrative modification, it'll automatically elevate to the board. So those fail-safes are there to ensure that what is moving forward is appropriate. Another key change on this update, the procedures update, is adding a provision in the event that the region is awarded emergency relief program funds during a declared emergency. Adding such projects as staff modification is the most expeditious way to move the project forward. We've never had this as a standout project or a standout item. If in the past we had to add a TIP project for an emergency situation, we would have had to convene the board to do that. This allows us to get the relief to the municipalities or the county as quickly as possible. With that, I will entertain any questions.
Thank you, Jim. Is there any further discussion or questions on this? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's carried. Next, we're going to consider amending the National Performance Measures Report for the Genesee Finger Lakes region. I look for a motion in a second.
So moved. Bill Carpenter.
Second, Ken Miller.
Thank you. Jim, please.
All right, thank you. Proposed council resolution 21-76 was reviewed and recommended for your approval by the planning committee on August 12th. I just want to remind folks that highway safety performance targets and measures are included in this national performance measures report, and it was recently revised in June in conjunction with the long-range transportation plan. However, since then, NISDOT has completed its annual analysis of crash data and has coordinated with the Governor's Traffic Safety Committee, or GTSC, to establish safety targets for 2022. GTC SC reports the 2022 safety targets via its annual highway safety report, and NISDOT reports their 2022 safety targets via its highway safety improvement program, or HSIP. Since GTC has agreed to support the state safety targets, the National Performance Measures Report needs to be updated to reflect those targets. And this must be accomplished within 120 days of NISDOT filing its HSIP report with USDOT. Additionally, RGRTA set transit safety targets in July in compliance with Federal Transit Administration rules. And like the state's targets, the state highway targets, GTC has agreed to support the RGRTA performance measures. The report currently includes performance measures related to vehicle and building assets, but now that the safety targets have been identified, we have to incorporate them into our report within 120 days. This is the first opportunity to do so, and we were prepared to do it for the highway stuff, so it just was an opportune time to also get it for the transit. And again, the transit safety targets responds to one of the recommendations identified in the certification report to incorporate these once they're identified. So we couldn't do it any quicker.
Good. Conclude your report, Jim. Is there any questions or discussion on this item? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. Next, we'll consider adopting the Genesee Finger Lakes Region Coordinated Public Transit Human Services Transportation Plan update. Look for some action to consider that, please? Motion and second.
Motion, Jay Gazelle.
Second from Washington.
Thank you, Jim, please, on this.
Sure, this resolution was reviewed and recommended for your approval by the planning committee on August 12th. The region is required to have a coordinated public transit, human services, transportation plan, or what we just more commonly call the coordinated plan, to qualify for the receipt of certain federal funds meant for human service transportation programs. The plan was last updated in 2016. Bob Williams of our staff led the update effort, and the plan identifies the transportation needs of individuals with disabilities, seniors, and people with low incomes throughout our region, and identifies strategies for meeting those needs more efficiently. The plan will be used to prioritize transportation services and projects for funding and implementation over the next 5 years. The effort did include a comprehensive review of various daily life needs of the elderly, again, people with disabilities and low income populations, such as needing to get daily services, medical appointments, where the pharmacies, where the grocery stores, where the senior centers, a full range of daily needs. And throughout the whole process, the effort was distilled down to the identification of 10 strategies. These strategies were developed with input from various stakeholders, and the first 3 strategies shown, if you could advance the slide, for mobility management, sorry, I can't read from this distance, but you'll see that over in the right-hand column, the first 3 strategies were the highest priority among our stakeholders. So we have opportunities to move forward. And on the mobility management front and the coordination of services, there is already an effort afoot between Ontario County, Monroe County, and I believe Lifespan, looking at some coordination, but then building upon the efforts that Livingston County implemented a few years ago with a platform that allows them to identify travel options for folks who qualify for various programs. The same platform is used whether you're doing it as a self-service on your own, or you've contacted somebody on the county staff and they're looking at options for you, say Department of Social Services or Office of the Aging. Everybody's working from the same information in the same platform. And that project in Livingston County has received national recognition and national awards. But now we're looking to potentially expand that to Ontario and Monroe County as well to create a truly, certainly first for our region, a regional platform to do this type of effort. With that, I will try to answer any questions.
Anyone, any discussion or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? It's carried. And finally, Jim, if you maybe some discussion on this establishment of an active transportation advisory committee.
Sure. So as you can see up on the slide, this is just an excerpt from our bylaws that makes reference to advisory groups. And earlier this year, I was approached by Mitch Gruber of the Rochester City Council and John Baines of the Monroe County Legislature, asking that we establish an active transportation advisory group that would include them as leaders of the respective recreation committees in their boards, and then try to include a diverse group of stakeholders that can bring voices to the table that haven't always been haven't understood their opportunities to contribute in the past. The intention would be to weigh in on various GTC efforts with an active transportation perspective that basically human powered. You're walking, you're bicycling, skateboarding, whatever. And over the years, I've had similar requests from the Bicycle Advisory Committee. So I did raise this with the Planning Committee, and noting that the bylaws do allow for the Planning Committee chairperson to establish an advisory group, but it says with the advice and consent of the GTC Executive Committee. But given that the full board was meeting today, I didn't think it made sense to call a separate meeting of the executive committee to discuss this one item. But really what we're trying to do is get the board's concurrence to allow the planning committee to start exploring and discussing the formation of an advisory committee. It would be advising them, and it would set the parameters of how that committee would interact with the planning committee. I would envision that we would start out a bit slow, and it probably would evolve over time as we sort of feel our way. And it may become a template for other advisory groups on other topics. But initially, the idea of getting feedback on various bicycle and pedestrian issues would be a natural fit for there. Try to, like I said, get some diversity at various segments of the community, from a racial diversity, economic diversity, gender, urban, suburban, rural. Out of necessity, I think we'd have to start out geographically small, so not beyond Monroe County, but then depending, the capacity of the group and how it's working, whether that grows or we create parallel committees for, say, the western part of the region, the eastern part of the region. And the group would be a sounding board for regional active transportation initiatives like our regional trails initiative. And what was brought to my attention by Mr. Gruber, Mr. Haynes, is that having the elected officials at the table could be a bridge to other policymakers so they can understand, well, why is it important to take up like a complete streets legislation or change policies within an organization. Unfortunately, when it was raised at the planning committee, the meeting had already gone very long and people had to leave for other commitments. There was not an opportunity for full discussion at the planning committee. So basically just looking for this body's blessing to let the planning committee discuss the formation. If it is to go forward, what would the parameters going forward?
I'd like to move that.
Well, we don't even need a motion in a second. We just
I support it.
Jim, is the understanding that the planning committee would then come back to this body once the committee's role has been defined?
We can do that. It was really becomes an advisory group of the board, but I see no reason, advisory group of the planning committee. I see no reason to report back what ultimately was decided by the planning committee.
Okay.
I say no reason to report back, no reason not to report back. I'm sorry.
One key word.
Yeah. I think it's successful. It would be nice to see it. As you said, reach out to other areas of our authority or jurisdiction. Certainly.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Many years ago, GTC did have a bicycle pedestrian advisory committee. I don't recall, I wasn't part of the conversation why that sort of ended. But it hasn't been active in many, many years. And I think we
really
have
like you threw skateboards in there.
And I think we have an opportunity to be, make it more diverse. It was interesting that, pre-COVID, so I guess 2 years ago now, we had an active transportation summit, and the keynote speaker was a gentleman, Mark Fenton, who was well known across the country. He used to have a show on PBS, was doing the Olympics. He's a Brockport native. So, and his parents are still there, so he has strong connections to Rochester, but he uses his acronym MAML, M-A-M-L, middle-aged men in Lycra. That's not the voice we need to hear. We need to get other voices at the table, and that's.
Yeah, Jim, if I can, I would like to see the scope of the advisory committee come back here so that we just understand what it is. I know as a public transportation provider, we're doing different outreach, with Reimagine, over 200 public meetings. We now have a study that scope of work that's been approved for village studies. Is this going to be an advisory group for public transit, or is it bicycle pedestrian? Just trying to.
Initially envisioned not public transit.
So just to be clear on
Yeah.
disabled.
So initially focus on non-motorized, transportation.
Right, as you said, human power.
Yeah.
It would be useful to have at least the information about what the planning committee comes up with.
Absolutely, yeah, we'll share that at the next meeting.
December 9th, we'll have some kind of update, just to hear how planning committee felt about it. After they have further full discussion about it.
And it's, why do we, it would be advisory in nature. Not have a decision for
No.
time.
No,
Right, that way.
it's just to provide an additional perspective and voice, as the planning committee weighs their considerations.
Is there any new business to come before us today? So we're, next meeting, December 9th, not sure the location.
Yeah, location to be determined. We wanted to get through, this meeting. The last time we met in February of 2020 was at the Henrietta Town Hall, when we reached out to them to come back to an in-person meeting. They've since had to reallocate space within their town hall for their own staff, so they could no longer accommodate us. I reached out to Bill and he was gracious enough to offer up, this conference room and also, one of the smaller conference room for GFL's, executive committee, and then GFL, their full council will be here, at 11 in the same room. So we're grateful for that opportunity. We've not worked out any logistics for December yet, and now we're also starting to envision our calendars for 2022, so, long-term, we'll have to figure that out as well. Very good, I accept the motion in a second to formally adjourn.
So moved. Thank you, Bill.
Motion in a second, all those in
Thank you for
favor?
helping.
Aye. Meeting stands adjourned. Thank you.
Location being, I just remember up here, so what
The GTC.
that wasn't where it was.
You were there for an asset?